Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. So I want to start with a disclaimer that this is not a substitute for mental health services. I strongly recommend that you seek out services in your area to work on your unique issues. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So here we are today, and this podcast, which is right now being recorded in January, is going to be coming out in February. So this is part of my little contributions to Black History Month. And the subject matter we're talking about today is one that I've always had a fascination after a friend introduced me to the works of Octavia Butler, the aspect of Afrofuturism. And we have many examples of that, from the classic Sunray to presently today, everything we've had with the Black Panther series, as well as the continuing works of the artist Janelle Monáe. We're here today, and I'm going to bring on my guest shortly, Dr. Lonny Brooks, to talk about Afrofuturism and mental health. So Dr. Lonny, I'm just going to say Lonny J. Brooks is of course, my tongue is just getting tongue-tied today all together. He is a summer chair of 2019 Department of Communication, an associate professor in strategic communications and media studies, and the Department of Communications at California State University, East Bay. He is the creative director for the Afro-rithms Future Group. He is a resident Afrofuturism and co-producer and co-creator with Ahmad Best, host and co-executive producer and co-creator of the Afrofuturist podcast with Ahmad Best. He is the creative director of the California Black Speculative Arts Movement and Black Speculative Arts Movement Futures, board director and organizer. He is the research affiliate for the Institute of the Future, a member of the Long Now Research Fellow, co-designer and co-director of Afro-rithms for the Future Game, and part of the editorial book for the Handbook of Universal Foresight. Dr. Lonny Brooks, welcome to Untying Knots.
Thank you. It's great to be here, too.
Good to have you. So, how did you get not only to being a professor and the doctorate, but your interest in Afrofuturism?
Well, my interest in Afrofuturism was just really based on growing up as a nerd, and from a very feeling of being a Black diasporan. Alien in a strange world, in a sense, too. I grew up with Star Trek posters on my wall, but I responded to a call for an anthology called Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro Blackness. And what called me to it was merging my interest in futures research with the vision, the past, present, and future of the Black diaspora. And tying those interests together was amazing to me. So I contributed an essay called Playing a Minority Forecaster in Search of Afrofuturism, where I had this future Stuart Brand. And see, I studied the Institute for the Future. It's a think tank that looks at the future, and it does future scenarios for Fortune 500 companies and foundations and government institutions. And when I stepped into that space in the late 90s, I was one of the few Black people around, and I felt that these visions didn't necessarily speak to me. They spoke to upper class white people mainly, and maybe to a global audience, but it really didn't necessarily center the Black diaspora. So that's where I thought, I could really contribute a perspective on what it means to be Black and thinking of the future. So Afrofuturism is about leveraging the past, what I call ancestral intelligence, undiscovered stories. And the idea of Afrofuturism is kind of like retelling the narrative of our journey. You know, we can think of it as how we came to the Americas as enslaved people. And we can think of it as a science fiction horror story. Think of it like this, where Black people in the millions were taken from their home planet in West Africa and transported across a vast interstellar sea, the Atlantic, with the latest in bondage technologies, right, to keep us enslaved aboard these ships, fed enough just so that we could become labor in the Americas. Once we arrive there, we are faced with total erasure. You'd be killed for speaking our languages, for playing our music, for practicing our religion. And there we were aliens and become hybrid innovators in a new world. And even with the imposition of Christianity upon us, you know, that replaced our tribal traditions, we took hymnals from the Christian tradition and transformed them into spirituals. Now I see spirituals as visions of the future, of an uncolonized future that, you know, we call Zion, where we are not enslaved. And these spirituals become our vibranium. If you've seen the Black Panther film, the vibranium is what powers the nation of Wakanda in that film, with the gadgets. But the vibranium really is this cultural engine that we have. And the spirituals then lay down the foundations for jazz, for rap, hip hop, house music, that have become part of every influential genre on the planet, you know, that has some form of Black music, Black culture within it. And so that's our vibranium. That's our cultural future vision. And that's the essence of Afrofuturism, where we're leveraging our ancestral intelligence and augmenting it into the future. And you know, the Black Panther movie is a good example of that, but it goes way back, right, to Sun Ra, the jazz musician who thought of himself as from another planet, reinvented himself in re-seeing the world. And then we have Samuel Delany, science fiction authors like that, and Octavia Butler, of course, you know, Greg Tate, cultural critic, and others too. And, you know, N.K. Jemisin now, and Nydia Okorafor as well too. But we also have an array of Black futurists who, you know, we may not see as futurists too, but are coming into the fore as Afrofuturists. Well, across the science, across literature, music, art. And so there's a radical vision of Black art. And so that radical vision of Black art debuted in a stunning exhibit called, it was called The Unveiling Visions, The Alchemy of the Black Imagination, at the Schoenberg Center for Black Research in New York City in 2015. And that was co-curated by John Jennings and Ronaldo Anderson. And it was a stunning exhibit. And so they transformed that into what's called the Black Speculative Arts Movement, or BSAM for short. And I was asked by Ronaldo to organize a Black Speculative Arts Movement conference in Oakland, you know, through my campus in Hayward. And so we've done it about 3 times. And it's like this festival conference where we bring Black artists who are thinking, you know, who are doing Afrofuturist art and music and literary work and even the sciences to talk about what does a Black future look like? How do we augment that? You know, how does an Africana future look like that, you know, is part of not only including the Black diaspora, but Africa as well. So the Black Speculative Arts Movement at the moment is one of the fastest growing movements of its kind in the world. So Canada has embraced it and now has its own chapter. Brazil recently started its own chapter. It's one of the largest chapters in the world. It's gone to South Africa, Cameroon, Nigeria, Kenya, and they're taking it and transforming what we call Afrofuturism 2.0 into Afrofuturism 3.0, adapting it for the Black continent, for the African continent. it's been embraced in Europe, in Germany, Spain, Italy, the UK, and now even in Australia. So it's so what that has led me to as well is co-creating a game called Afro-Rithms from the Future. And it's based on a game that Stuart Candy created called The Thing from the Future. And when we played this game, I played this game with students at my campus at Cal State East Bay in a game jam that my colleague Ian Pollock had created too. And we played this game, The Thing from the Future, and we hacked it up. The idea is that you have different scenarios of the future. What does the future look like as transformational? And then you have a mood for the future. What does it look like emotionally? And then you have a context for the future. What does childhood or identity look like in the future? And then you have an object from the future, like it could be a book, a film, a postcard. And what happens when you mash them all together? What do you get as an artifact from the future? So if you took, postcard, education, optimism, and transformation, what does a postcard look like that represents all those things? What my students noticed when we did this jam session with them is they're predominantly women, women of color. Like, Beyonce's Lemonade album had just come out, and they were like, with the mood, they were like, well, Kanye's a mood, Beyonce's a mood, Netflix is a mood, but these categories weren't represented in the Thing from the Future game at the time. And they were like, well, where's the Black diaspora? Where's LGBTQ? And then for objects, they were like, well, where's the handbag? So it wasn't quite represented in the Thing from the Future game. And I just realized then, like, what the future really needs is a cultural accent. We need to represent ourselves in the future, 10 times more than is present already. So that's where the idea of creating Afro-rithms from the future. And it's not just rhythm as in musical rhythm, but it's algorithm, RITHMS, Afro-rhythms, because we're surrounded by Afro-rhythms every day. And, we're surrounded by algorithms every day, right? But those algorithms, those recipes for how computers do things and how we operate with computers don't center Black people in them as much as they can and should. And so that's where the idea of Afro-rhythms from the future came from.
So as you're talking about that and all of it, it's like, I would even go further to say life rhythms, because we are controlled by the circadian rhythms, the abilities of when we eat, when to defecate. All of those things are also rhythms that even predate music as well as the electronics that we were around, which now makes me wonder, because of everything you're saying there, is there perhaps we need to take a different word or a different explanation to talk about when we're talking about mental health in relation to Afrofuturism?
Yeah, I think the idea that there's research in neuroscience around gaming that I find really interesting and draw from, where we actually, and this is also through my colleague Jake Dunnigan, who discusses this as well, where they've done MRI studies of our brain where the same regions where we have memory, we also think about the future. And what happens is that, like, when we stare and look into a scene, we see more than is there in that scene. We read into it more, and that's called a boundary extension error. And we do it all the time, and that's our capacity for looking into the future. Now, what if in gaming, and especially in forecast imagination games, we can imagine and have alternative memories of the future that could heal trauma? And that's where I think the connection to mental health is really exciting, as we can imagine, like spirituals have, and that have sustained us in our musical culture. This vibranium that has sustained us is to create alternative memories of the future that we can implement, and that we can heal our memories of trauma by building onto it. We have, and there's so many examples of where Black people have recovered their identities after slavery, right? They've created towns, they've created educational institutions, only to be erased too by white supremacy. But at the same time, our capacity is there to keep reinventing and keep becoming and being hybrid innovators of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where I get excited about how we can heal trauma through Afrofuturism, through really gaining more muscle in being even more intentional about how we create the future.
Beautiful. Very beautiful. So why do you think that the idea of mental health, or whatever name we need to now give it, hasn't been a bigger theme in Afrofuturism work, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like just spaces that it's been going through in order to even like claim space for the 21st century. You know, I think that's what Afrofuturism has tried to do, is like say, you know, we do have a future, because, you know, even Alicia Wormsley's poster, "There are Black people in the future," you know, became so controversial. Like, why? Why is that? Like, even trying to, you know, have that argument, you know, was like, that's just a profound conclusion,
Right.
you know. And a lot of folks have thought that, you know, even my partner and colleague in the Afro-Rhythm Futures Group, co-founder Ahmed Best, you know, he talks about how he played Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars, so he's faced the erasure and backlash of that character, and in that, you know, he's gone to studios where he's pitched like a Black Star Trek comedy, and studios have said to him, "Well, Black people aren't interested in the future." I'm like, whoa.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
so just fighting those spaces that we even have a claim to the future has kind of probably diminished, you know, to talk about mental health. Mental health is actually at the core of Afrofuturism, because it's about, you know, our fundamental identity as human beings, to be really, to leverage our ancestral intelligence. That what I love what W.B. Du Bois talks about, because he was a science fiction writer. Not many people know that. In 1908, he created a series of stories called The Prince of Steel, and he has this instrument called the megascope that looks for undiscovered stories. And the idea of the undiscovered story is that we are so rich in our stories about the past, present, and future as an African diaspora and African peoples, you know, that those undiscovered stories are what can fuel our souls, what can help us in treating our trauma of being enslaved and being impoverished, and how we can rise above that, you know. And what gives me inspiration is like even thinking about, you know, the Dogon tribe in Mali has an origin myth of itself as coming from another planet, from Sirius B. And it's only recently that astronomers have confirmed that Sirius B does exist. They knew about it with an unaided eye. You know, so it's like, whoa, there's something so interesting about that, right? But it shows you how we have this knowledge, even in our textiles. You know, there are fractal textiles that have recursions of patterns within them. Well, that actually laid the foundation of modern computing. That knowledge, and it was also through sand divination and textiles. It came to Europe. And when European mathematicians discovered this recursive loop of fractals, it blew their minds. And it laid the foundation for fractal geometry and modern computing. It actually comes from the spirit of Africa, you know? And so finding these undiscovered stories actually heals me every day, because it's like, oh my God, you know, we have so much. And to really center ourselves and to center ourselves in the algorithms that surround us today is so important. So, yeah.
And especially how we even create our the algorithms and the stories, as you said, the undiscovered stories, which are also the stories that we're getting have fed to us by the ancestors, but also the ones that we are being sparked by experiences in the here and now. I mean, I'm a tabletop role-playing player, and have been last several years, I was running a game for Dungeons and Dragons using their quote-unquote African setting. It's got problems that I basically had to go in there and rebuild entire sections of it to have an actual modern society appropriate for the time. And then as I'm playing the game with my players, I suddenly realized, oh, I'm playing out the Underground Railroad story here. I'm playing the Back to Africa movement, rebuilding Liberia in this storyline. It's like, how many other storylines was I unwittingly at the time pulling from history and putting into my game for this shared storytelling?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. It's like, we can leverage and imagine and rebuild and reinvent. I mean, the whole thing is, when we talk about the game Afro-rithms in the future, is like, how can we have fun ending white supremacy?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like we're people have to be blamed, but it creates a whole new space outside of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
The way forward for our mental health is, for everybody's mental health, really, is for white supremacy to end.
Mm-hmm.
It's hurting white people themselves too. It's limiting people's capacity to invent the future. And what we need is a global solution for the future that includes and liberates everyone.
Definitely. And as you're saying that, it just made me think about a couple of other things. I know I've seen a book, and it's in my Amazon queue list, that is talking about black fractal structures that was built into the houses as well. I'd have to go dig it up, the one as possible there, and how that again was being recognized by a white mathematician and computer programmer. And another one, I was just listening to the backlog of another D&D podcast called Three Black Halflings.
Ooh.
Yeah, you want to listen to that one, start from the beginning. But they recently had, or not recently, at least one point, they had someone on who was talking about the racism that's coded into the stories from Tolkien. And he was talking about some of the other games that he'd done. And one of them was inspired by Sun Ra, about fighting racism as being these cultural touchstones who were materializing in these various situations to help people go forward. And from a therapy standpoint, that is that standpoint of externalization. That is that standpoint of us as going with the classic, what would so-and-so do? All of these things have always been present. They've just, again, never had that. So I would say the headline in an Afrofuturism story around our mental health, even though it's always been there. Like I always thought, but we just never would have been talking about it.
It's so true. God, that's so interesting. I mean, I think that first book you were talking about is from Ron E. Glash,
Okay.
who's a mathematician talking about African fractals, African textiles and fractals. And his protege is actually Latrice Gaskins, who does work. She works with AI deep dream technology to create art.
Oh.
And she just has a book coming out called the Vernacular of the Imagination, something along those lines. I'm butchering the title at the moment, but has this wonderful exhibit that she co-curated at the Smithsonian right now called Futures. And her art is this kaleidoscope of fractal geometry, and she does portraits of famous Black leaders and celebrities, and it's just so inspiring. So, and then what you just said about the Black halflings, right?
Yeah, I'll send you the link once we're done here, so you can start listening to them. But and I'll send you the one specifically for the episode I had just been listening to over the holiday break, where they were talking about this. And as it was that during the holiday break, I'd gone to the Oakland Museum to see the Mothership exhibit.
Yeah.
And I had just recently listened to that like 2 or 3 days earlier, to hear them talk about that and then go to the exhibit and see Sun Ra as part of it. And it's like, yes, I'm listening to the universe. I'm listening to the ancestors.
The Mothership is such an important idea because it's kind of like, the mothership of the Dagon, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mothership of George Clinton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of landing on Earth in Black joy,
Mm-hmm.
and that the mothership is that repository of ancestral intelligence that we have, that repository of undiscovered stories that were erased during colonialism too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think recovering that is a pathway towards increased liberating mental health.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
very much so. It's again, how the thread is always there, but we don't always recognize it the way so many people are used to thinking about it as such.
Yeah, because we grow up. I mean, for instance, there's a term I coined called Afrofuturism or Afrofuture type, where it's an ascendance of Black visions, but then there's simultaneous erasure as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like Hidden Figures, the film, The Hidden Figures is such a good example of that, right? Like Black women, mathematicians, engineers, and computer scientists that were charting the trajectory of white astronauts in 1960s NASA that we haven't heard about until decades afterwards, and that they were these vibrant women that made these enormous contributions, right? And even Tulsa, Oklahoma, as the Black Wall Street. I didn't grow up hearing about that until recently, and then seeing how it was in ascendance and then erased, white supremacist violence.
Which has been big themes in both the Watchmen series as well as Lovecraft Country.
Yes.
Which has really woken so many people up to it. And I can think of one of the other examples of that, which was an earlier episode in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Beyond the Stars, where Cisco is, the character of Cisco, is creating the Deep Space Nine stories, and they pulp the entire book that he's writing on so that it doesn't get published.
Oh my God.
Okay, so you got to go back and watch Deep Space Nine.
Watch that.
Oh yes, I think there was around season 4 or so forth. That's when he started to get the messages from the emissaries to try and teach him and prepare him for what's going to come in the future. And even there, we have the aspect of some consider that the religions of Bajor destroyed Cisco, but it's like, no, this is fundamentally also a Black story of our connection with spirit.
Wow.
As well. How does it communicate with us? And how can it also be used to blind us?
Oh man, I gotta watch that again. Okay.
So, I think that's a place where we should take a break.
Okay.
So come back and listen to the rest of us as we talk here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Dr. Lonny J. Brooks and Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist. So we'll be right back.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information. Do you have knots? Not the physical tightness in your neck and back, and not the ones on a rope, but metaphors for the helpful and unhelpful tugs in life that can help us ascend to a new level or stop us from falling too far back down. Join host Perry Clark for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered, a program about mental health and its practice from an Indigenous person of color. We'll help you find the knots that help you and avoid the ones that don't. Listen for new episodes every other week on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.
Tune in to the Voice America Variety channel on the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Voice America Variety broadcasts a diverse array of topics, reaching a global community. Our experts come from all walks of life, and the topics they discuss are everything from current events, arts and entertainment, leadership, parenting, relationships, self-improvement, career advice, and a variety of other topics. Check us out today. You're sure to find something of interest. Voice America Variety. Talk on today's hot topics.
Live up to your fullest potential. This is the Voice America Empowerment Channel.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm here talking with Dr. Lonny J. Brooks. And we are continuing our conversation about Afrofuturism and mental health. So during our quick break here, we were talking about a couple of things, but one of the things was on how you sort of came to be. And I know we talked a little about in the first half, but there's some other specifics that I think you wanted to go into.
Yeah, I want to say like the African diaspora is something that probably also never gets fully nuanced about too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I'm discovering I'm in my 50s now. So like, I'm really learning how to express my full identity of being Black.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm Black, Jewish, and Native American. And that's important to me because it just represents how vast the African diaspora is and how long its lineage is go,
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm part of a synagogue where we're actively dismantling white supremacy within the my Jewish synagogue, and part of a, diversity, equity, inclusion committee in doing that. But not only that, when I say I grew up with Star Trek posters on my wall, I also grew up with a visual disability where I was very nearsighted until just 10 years ago. And what Star Trek gave me, and seeing the Next Generation with Lieutenant Forge and his band that allows the visor that allows him to see through his blindness, it always sparked that idea that technology could expand my world. I have juvenile diabetes as well that I got when I was like 11 or 12. And, technology was another pathway that science, insulin was only discovered in 1921, right? So it's like the idea that we could survive and live with new technologies that really influenced being. And not only that, but that like we have a spectrum of identities that we carry with us too. And I have a daughter who's half Filipina, and all of me. Like that's a whole other spectrum of range of identities that I think is really important to think about when we think about the future and how the future is going to hold our vast array of identities that we can express and celebrate and not be, ashamed of, right? So that's been part of my journey in doing this and fueled my desire to think about a future that is very expressive, very liberating, that we can find ways that, Native American traditions can inform us about as well. Too. So so that's, part of what I've been looking at. And, so when I came to the Institute for the Future, it was like, how do I bring this into being? And we actually, I had the opportunity to do this festival in the Encanto neighborhood of San Diego, where I was a PhD student at the time at UC San Diego. We created a storytelling festival where Black activists from that neighborhood were able to tell their stories of the future. But we did it within like a tent setting with some cultural groups that came to, fill the space with music and imagination. And we did it in alliance with the Institute for the Future, sponsored it all, and the Center for Digital Storytelling. So that was in 2001. That was a kind of a peak into what I think the Black speculative arts movement actually is today. The festival conference where we celebrate the Black imagination. And so, in that, I can say that I've been so grateful for some of the support that I've had from different people, especially my colleagues, like Ahmed Best and his brother-in-law texted me and said, hey, my brother-in-law Ahmed Best would like to talk to you. And the second line was, and he played Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars. I was like, whoa, okay. And then, we got to talking through FaceTime 3 hours later, created the Afrofuturist podcast.
And I've listened to a few episodes.
Oh yeah, great, thank you. And then we connected with the Fathomers organization, which is a research foundation that supports projects that don't usually get made. They're a creative research foundation. And they supported us in creating Afro-rithms from the future. And that game actually came about through this really interesting lab called Dynamic Land. Yeah, it was on 9th and Broadway in Oakland. And it was about creating a communal computer where we didn't have to be on our screens. We had computers that were like projectors on the ceilings and then projected onto pieces of paper that transformed them into playable media.
Oh,
so we
very
could
nice.
talk computing over tables rather than just being on our phones and our computer laptops. And that's where I met one of my collaborators, Eli Kosminski, and a co-creator of the game as well. And we brought the game to the Institute for the Future in conjunction with Ahmed, and we had some plants from the Fathomers to help us bring the game forward. But I'll never forget when Ahmed stood up and said, hey guys, will you mind if I help MC this with you? And he just was so engaging with folks. At that moment, we had an Afrofuturist festival, a Black Speculative Arts festival at the Institute for the Future in 2019. And it was...
I think that's the one I came to. That's where I first heard about the African realms, and that's where I first saw you. That's when...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was in the background, in the audience watching that.
Oh. Well, one of my graduate students, she came up with this idea of what if you scanned, you had an ancestral tattoo and you scanned it across an ATM machine and you got reparations.
Yes, I remember hearing that one.
Wow.
Yes, I remember that.
I'm so glad you were there. Oh my God. So I'll never forget what Ahmed said. He said, a reparations tattoo? I think you just won the game. And and so that's what also after we had the panels, you could go downstairs and play with these different simulations. They had a virtual reality simulation, different art. I mean, there's this, Palo Alto, the Institute for based, and it has this, office space above. And then below, there's this whole cavernous exploration space that they built, and they had this virtual reality simulation from Hyphen Labs called Neurospeculative Afrofeminism. I'll never forget when I put it on, because the idea is that you're in a hair salon and that your hair connects to this mothership of memories, collective kind of through our hair memories of the past, present, and future of the Black diaspora in Africa. When I experienced that, I was like, I need this therapy on a daily basis. Like, whoa, I just felt so calm and soothing. And I just opened my mind up to how much Afrofuturism can act as a salve, as a healing agent.
So as you're describing that, and that, because unfortunately I missed it when I visited, I think you might find it interesting to meet Silo 919 from the Into the Motherlands podcast and game.
Oh yeah, Into the Motherlands. Oh my God, I want to play that game.
So do I. And I help. My money went into kickstarting it. So maybe we need to get together and have a game session on it.
That'd be great. I mean, because even before I saw that Into the Motherlands, I saw another one through the indigenous perspective called Coyote and Crow.
Oh yes, started that one as well. Waiting for the book to come out.
I just got mine.
Oh, I gotta go check my mail.
Yeah. It is a brilliant, it's kind of like, the Black Speculative Arts movement through an indigenous lens, because the illustrations are amazing and the backstory is too. And I I mean, I was amazed at that. How that started out at like, I think 25,000 and went to like 2 million or something.
Something on that aspect. Did you also see the other one called Odorum, which was early? It was done closer to, I think, 2008 and 19, which was another of the game systems that was put on Kickstarter. Another one I kickstarted, and I'm actually showing in the book that I have right now. But you should be able to get that as well.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Look at that. Wow.
So I would say the TTRP landscape has been a very good place for developing more of that content for going into the imagination.
Yes.
And TTRP refers to tabletop role playing.
And that's, I kind of think of Afro-rithms from the Future, our game, as sort of a TTRP, role-playing game, but on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
That you can do with events and organizations,
mm-hmm.
people. Because another thing that we've created with my colleague at the Museum of Children's Arts in Oakland is we've actually created a community future school
Mm-hmm.
with the help of a grant from the Blue Shield Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Owing this to Rachel Wick, who is a senior board member, who approached me after seeing my talk on Afrofuturism. She said, what can we do to look about, she wanted to talk to me about Afrofuturism. Together, we said,
Mm-hmm.
what would it be like to have a network of the imagination in California, a regional network of the imagination that would center marginalized voices and really speak to community visions of the future.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a small kind of prototype of this, we created the Community Future School for high schoolers and young adults. And so we're in our second year of that, and we're looking at creating a youth manifesto for envisioning Oakland for 2045.
Beautiful.
And so
Very beautiful.
are playing the game Afro-rithms in the Future, and then generating prototypes of their visions across art, society, technology, environment, politics, and society about what does Oakland look like in 2045.
Mm-hmm.
And, so that's sort of like our attempt at kind of playing a total role-playing game, but, with the students as they're creating it.
Beautiful. And another one that comes to mind is Alan Walker's Edgegore. Now, it's more Native American based, but he is a Black Lakota man. So there's another one where, again, imagining a very different future that is not centered in Western Euro fantasy.
Wow. What's it called again?
Edgegore. I'll send you the link for it. I have it. It's on the shelf and I can't reach it at the moment.
I just want to give a shout out to the Afrofuturist artists that we work with in the game too, like Alan Clark, who's a local Oakland artist, who's moving soon to Oregon, but then Anane Brown, amazing. Another one is Karen. I'm butchering her name now. Karen Corafor. Oh, Senarofuro. Sorry, Karen and Malik. They're amazing artists. Karen created the Black Woman as God that's going on in Soma Arts right now. And she is amazing. They're both amazing in terms of their Afrofuturist visions. But even calling an exhibit Black Women as God, to me, is another way of expanding our mental health. Where we see Black women for who they are, as goddesses, as, in the rightful place.
As opposed to the very limiting view of pathology of disease, which is what built much of what a lot of mental health built originally out of, and is still being tried to be shoehorned into, as there are those of us who seek to go beyond that.
Yeah.
So right. I think that's a perfect segue into the question as one of the constants on this program, which is myths and realities. So what would you say is one of the myths and myths that comes up around mental health, especially for Black mental health?
Well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So, mental health was usually seen by my parts of my community and in the Black community as something that was like white people's medicine. Like, oh no, we're doing it ourselves. We don't need that stuff. Plus we can't afford it. So how does it apply to us? But I kind of grew up knowing that everyone could use a therapist, like someone to talk to that you could have confidence in and find a liberating vision to live into. And I still think there's barriers to it, right? Like, I'm a member of Kaiser. Their mental health is not accessible to many people, right? And you have to pay for it. Why isn't that just a right? I don't understand. Like, that should just be a right of birth.
Yeah. I was just dealing with the other day a consultation with somebody who is trying to get. There is a lot of stuff that they need to work on, and I'm hearing they're going to Kaiser. And it's like, honey, I think you're going to need to do more. You need more work here than what you're going to get over there. I hate to say you're going to have to pay for this, but to really do this, you're going to need the consistency. And consistency is one of the biggest things that makes mental health work, because it's the building of the trust. It's the building of being able to dig in and find what has become maladaptive, what was taken in the wrong way, so they can be going in a different direction. I know a conversation I've had with a couple of other interviewers is that standpoint. I know we were talking at one point about how the crack epidemic of the 80s just devastated our communities. And the thing that I think most people forget is all of the damage that did. There was already essentially mental health issues going on beforehand, that the crack just became the escape.
Right.
And the thing that comes to mind is how much of that generation that fell prey to it is a generation that was born after all the trauma of the civil rights period.
Yeah.
How much of that trauma get encoded into that generation? Just like for your Jewish heritage, is how much trauma was encoded in after the Holocaust?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, because like the Black Panther Party itself, to me, is sort of like, part of when I was in school was seen as like, it was talked about as if it was a terrorist organization, when it was a liberating movement, that fed children, that was improving people's mental health, and then, also got sidelined by what we are finding out was a conspiracy to intentionally introduce drugs into the Black community.
To erase once more.
Yes, by the Nixon administration, and it's just like realizing the appalling nature of white supremacy and how it's worked to try to hold us back. Really makes me think, how do we create our own system through Afrofuturism that obliterates white supremacy, right? That includes the fundamental, the Black Panther Party 10 points is so relevant today. Like it sounds so radical, but like it's not radical. It's have reparations, an end to police brutality, have complete access to education and healthcare. It's like, yes. I always think that in some way a baby should be born with like whatever, discounting inflation, be born with $1 trillion and access to all the care it needs. And that, like, to heal is at the center of Afrofuturism, to heal and create alternative memories of the future that heal our trauma and that augment ourselves, into the future.
Because we exist in the future.
Yeah, we exist in the future for sure. And that's why, I'm inspired by, Star Trek Discovery.
Oh, very much. Very much.
Such a queerness too. Like queer stories play out on that show. Having the main character be the strong Black woman, a Black, goddess practically.
And equally to consider in this current season, she is essentially dating a Black alien.
Oh,
that's the thing that is like suddenly dawned on me, is like, yes, Charles Book is a black alien from a different planet, not Earth, entirely different history, not necessarily trapped up with all the aspects of the diaspora and the history we have, that she's having a relationship with and dealing with the mental aspects of grief.
Right. Yeah. Right. Who, he's dealing with his planet eventually being obliterated, dealing with being, 1,000 years or whatever, 1,000 years from the current time.
As well as the fact that she's been able to reconnect with her mother, who she thought was dead.
Right. Oh my God, this is so rich. Right.
And as the conversation I'm having with another colleague who's also fun, was this aspect of, as was said in this most recent season, the psych evaluation on her was someone who went through a massive trauma and now needs to rescue everybody.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And that becomes a very critical thing when you are in a command position and you have to make the life and death decisions.
Yeah.
And are struggling with the question of the good of the one or the good of the many. And how can you have both?
Right. And so interesting how she enters the future first. She has to do all the adaptation. And so she's kind of learned to buck the rules, to kind of reinvent herself.
She's had to reinvent herself.
Yeah.
She got, even though she purposely chose it, she crossed the Atlantic.
Yes. Right. It's like a whole African diaspora reborn into the future.
And her family is the crew of Discovery.
Wow. Right. Yeah.
So, food for thought, folks. And with that, we need to be wrapping up. So, Dr. Brooks, thank you for coming on here and having this conversation. And I look forward to, I think we may need to have a part 2 to this.
I'd love it. Thank you so much, Barry.
All righty. So where can people find you if they wanted to connect with you more?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Avi Lonny. That's AVILONNY. Twitter, and also on Instagram with the same. And we also have Afro-rithms-from-the-future.org as our game site. So you can leave messages with us there too.
Perfect.
So thank you.
Perfect. So thank you very much. And folks, keep listening. And I hope you've enjoyed this for Black History Month as well. And keep listening. We got some more conversations coming up. So,
thank you.
Be well.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.